Hey, welcome back. In this video, I'd like to talk a little bit more about reality and refining some of the concepts that I've introduced and even sort of glossed over or misrepresented there. So the first and primary clarification that I want to make is that imaginary things do not necessarily have no value. I might be able to say that they have no intrinsic value, but in so much as not non-real, but imaginary things and maybe inaccurate models can drive us in action to discover or produce value later in reality. Then these imaginary things then have value. So the point is more that value can only ultimately exist in reality. That doesn't say that if you believe something has value, that makes it real. That's not the statement I'm making. It's that at the end of the day, at any given moment, the basis of value and meaning must be anchored in what is real or true. So in other words, we have many examples, right? We have religions that have lasted long times and arguably have a lot of upsides as well as downsides for reality, right? They might keep people together, bring people together, have values that lead to things like reproduction and families, which perpetuates humanity itself and the ability to even have this conversation because there are conscious beings to have this conversation. So there's many different examples of things that might not be inherently true or real or accurate that ultimately map to or can result in value or simply change in reality. They can affect reality, right? We can hold imaginary concepts that drive behaviors that affect reality, right? Like there is even a reality to be able to hold an imaginary idea or inaccurate idea. That doesn't mean that all these things are created equal. Again, sort of the inherent basis for anything to have any value is reality. But then you can sort of take a step back to another tier and measure, for example, effectiveness to drive action. And you can measure imaginary ideas and even claim that in this lesser measure of effectiveness that they do have value, right? And effectiveness would be making change in reality, but effectiveness only gets up to level 2, which is it's a goodness claim, whether or not something is effective towards something, right? What works is a goodness claim. Fundamentally, value can only land and have basis in reality. I think a second little point that I'd want to make about reality is, for example, in the sciences, which I'd say good science is attempting to measure, and yes, it's inherently reductionist and so on and so forth, but it's attempting to measure and contribute to better models for understanding and predicting reality, essentially, or at least observable phenomenon. And these models, these maps that we get from science or story and myth have various degrees of effectiveness, and sure, no model or map can ever be exactly accurate, right? It is what it is, and it is not reality. It is not one-to-one mapping of the totality. These are tools. None of them will ever be perfect. Again, none of this framework means to say you must pursue the absolute and get to the absolute of reality or goodness or work. It is about a lean, a disposition, a direction. it. And maybe secondarily, maps, ideas and tools and stories that motivate effective action, etc. Another quick note on maps or stories or myth, right? We have stories that attempt to contribute understandings of reality, maybe science, for example. We have maps and stories that contribute more so on the level of goodness. For example, law. Law does not make a truth claim. It does not make a claim, an ontological claim about reality. But it is very much a should. It is, if this, then, we may have punishment, that. So law, religion, myth, these are maps and stories that may contribute primarily to the level of goodness. And then again, we have maps and stories, which, entities of varying levels of imperfect accuracy that contribute to the level of work. Things that are maybe inspirational, or these days maybe there's a lot of stories and things that actually just pull your attention and result in you not actually taking action. So these two main points have been about the varying degrees of accuracy, saying that while something imaginary and non-true may be inherently non-valuable, really the measure of value in the point is does it contribute back to reality? And then in the second piece, we talked a little bit about maps and stories and things like science and law and myth and inspirational stories and maps and how they contribute each to the different levels of reality, goodness, and work. But I want to also make a comment on this framework does not attempt to make a claim whether objective reality or subjective reality or perception or even phenomenology and perception versus any alternative. It's really not trying to make any claim quite at that level. You're welcome to do that, but again, there's no statement within this framework that says to go be an academic or an extremist about any of the steps in this framework. So you can take reality somewhat simply, especially if you're just attempting to use this framework as a guide.